Hi there, this is Solitude from Solitude Films, and welcome to another Top 10 video. Today's Top 10 is Top 10 Orson Welles films. When I first got into cinema seriously, Orson Welles was kind of the first, or one of the first directors that I fell in love with, and his films. I mean, a lot had to do with the look of his films. His shot composition is right up there. As far as I'm concerned, the best directors as far as shot composition and framing of characters are Kurosawa, Sergio Leone, Orson Welles, and Stanley Kubrick. So the look of Welles films are usually interesting and different from everybody else. I thought first of all I'll start with a little bit about the man, because Orson Welles arguably has the most myths and legends about him of any film director. Quite a lot of these myths he was happy to kind of enlarge himself. The stories of him as a child, at the age of 4, reciting Shakespeare and writing pieces of music on the piano. Welles himself said he wasn't particularly good at school. But there's all these legends of him being a very precocious child. Throughout his films, sometimes his character, it's hard to mesh or separate between his character and Welles himself. Obviously we'll talk about that as we go through the films. He started off, well, allegedly, he kind of blagged his way onto stage in Dublin at the age of 16, saying he was a famous actor from America. And then going back to America, he got involved in radio, and then he elevated to the voice of the Shadow, because Orson Welles has had such a great voice. And then he started his own kind of radio group and theatre, the Mercury Theatre Company. Obviously most famously on the radio, he did a version of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, but instead of just doing it as a straight adaptation, he did it as a news report, and sent half of America out with their shotguns and their pickup trucks and thinking there was an alien invasion going on. Welles himself only realised kind of how serious it was and how much trouble he was in when the police turned up at the radio station looking for him. And then he would start his own theatre company, like I said, and one of the great kind of breakthrough things he did was an all-black cast in Harlem of Macbeth, set in Haiti with witch doctors, and which was apparently quite the thing. So in his early 20s he ended up going to Hollywood with RKO, and obviously produced Citizen Kane, which strangely enough will be on the list. That's not a surprise to anybody. And the great tragedy of Orson Welles' career was that Citizen Kane, his first proper film, Obviously did a short film before that with Joseph Cotton, but Citizen Kane was kind of his first proper job, or first proper film, sorry. And even though it may have been loosely based on Randolph Hearst, the media magnate, and allegedly the Hearst company asked for the prints to be destroyed and burned, Citizen Kane remains pretty much the only Orson Welles film that is the complete vision of what Orson Welles actually wanted. And that's kind of the great tragedy of Orson Welles, the fact that most of his films are butchered or truncated by studios. I mean, to be fair, I think Orson Welles brought some of it on himself, but we'll get into the stories as we go through this list. Hopefully this video won't be too long, but I've got a feeling I may ramble a little bit, because the stories of the making of the films, or what happened to the films after they were finished, might actually be longer than the films themselves. So the problem really started with his second film, The Magnificent Ambersons, which was originally over about 2.25 hours. Welles had been given a job to go down to South America to make a propaganda film to convince some of the South American countries to go on not the fascist side, because there was a few South American countries at the time that were leaning towards going fascist. So he was down there making a film down there. The studios were waiting for him to come back to finish The Magnificent Ambersons. They were panicking because he wouldn't return their phone calls, because Welles was very much, I've done that, I'm on to the next thing. That's just how his personality was. And then Pearl Harbor happened, and the tone and subject of Magnificent Ambersons maybe wasn't the best thing to talk about when America had pretty much declared war. So the studios butchered it and cut it to 88 minutes, stuck a tacked on happy ending directed by Robert Wise, who was the editor in the film. And obviously Welles took this understandably very badly, and his reputation, because he'd went to Hollywood and his reputation was this genius and this kid genius, the studios were probably a little bit scared of him and intimidated by him, so they were looking to knock him down a peg or two. So they butchered Magnificent Ambersons. And as we go through the list, some of his films, the footage has been found and kind of reconstructed, whereas the footage from Magnificent Ambersons was essentially thrown into the ocean and never to be seen again. And that kind of affected Welles going forward. He always had the reputation of being over budget and over time, but that's not really true according to those in the know. So as his career progressed, he did more personal films. He never really had box office success, and then sadly, for probably the last 15 years of his life, he was always desperate to get money to finish films or start films. And it is funny that he influenced so many people and so many filmmakers that would become powerful in the future and had lots of clout, but yet none of them seemed to help Orson Welles later in his life and later in his career. And then when he died in 1985, of course everybody was like, oh, what a great guy he was and what a great director he was, but nobody actually helped him in the last 15 years or so of his career in life. Maybe it's the curse of Citizen Kane, which always appears in top 10 film lists. well, it's going to appear in my top 10 film list, but I mean top 10 film lists of all time. And maybe that was the curse of it. Maybe he was just too smart for his own good. Maybe he had a little bit of self-destruction in his DNA. But it speaks to how great a filmmaker he was, that his films are still so highly regarded when most of them aren't necessarily the final vision of what he actually wanted. So enough of my rambling, let's start the top 10 before everybody switches off. So at 10 is the classic case of Orson Welles, and this is Mr. Arkadin, also known as Confidential Report. This is a Criterion edition, spine number 322. Now this is a film from 1955, and it's about somebody being hired by an important person, a very rich person, to find out about his past, which is almost a riff on Citizen Kane. It stars Robert Arden, who I'm not really familiar with. I don't think many people are familiar with. He did bit parts in radio for Orson Welles, and he's really the weak link in the film. It's a globe-trotting trip across Europe, as various eccentric people, including Michael Redgrave as a bizarre Dutch antiques dealer, tell Robert Arden who Mr. Arkadin actually is, or who he was, and bad things seem to happen to the people he speaks to. Now, again, this is a classic Welles film. There's 5 different versions in existence for it, because there isn't an actual Orson Welles edit. He never finished editing the film. So this massive box set has the book that Orson Welles may or may not have actually written. It has 3 versions of the film. So Criterion, they actually restored what they could and tried to piece together what they could. So there's a 2006 comprehensive version, which is 105 minutes. There's Confidential Report, which was the US release, which was truncated, and the Corinth version. There's also like 2 different Spanish versions where the lead actor, played by Robert Arden, has 2 different names. It's all very confusing, which kind of fits with the actual story. The story is told in flashbacks, but the studio, for the Confidential Report version, the studio cut out all the flashbacks. They redubbed Orson Welles' voice on a couple of characters, so Welles would shoot stuff and then redub it afterwards in his later work, so he could sometimes voice actors himself. In the studio, so for example, at the start of the film, there's a dying character who Robert Arden comes across, and he wants to give him the secret of Mr. Arkadin. And in Orson Welles' version, it's just because the man's dying. Robert Arden's the last person he'll talk to, so he gives him a secret for staying with him as he dies. Whereas the studio just cut redid the actor's voice and just did it as a straight revenge plot of, I'll get my revenge on Arkadin by telling you the secret. So it's just subtle things like that. The studio got rid of the flashback structure and cut bits out. So Confidential Report, one of the versions on this Criterion release, is a bit of a mess, but the comprehensive edition does actually make more sense. And as a film, again, the lead is the weak point in it. You could actually imagine a young Orson Welles playing it, but obviously Orson Welles plays Mr. Arkadin, because as in theatre parlance, he was a king actor. He was just great at playing kings and important people. So he plays this possibly corrupt tycoon. There's just, as usual with Welles, there's great shots that just make you pretty much say everybody else stop making films, because these shots are just so beautiful. There's a nice little scene with a guy who trains fleas. There's a wonderful masquerade ball with rather creepy masks. But because it is fragmented, it was this 2006 cut, which runs at 105 minutes, was kind of put together just by scholars. Again, it's kind of what Welles might have wanted. So that's why it's at number 10, because it is fragmented, it is kind of a patchwork film. But again, unfortunately, we'll never actually see Welles' complete vision of it. So that's number 10. I'll try and speed up. Number 9 is F for Fake. This is a Criterion Blu-ray number 288, and this is Welles at his most playful. It's about charlatans and forgers, as Orson Welles himself says quite often that he's been accused of being a charlatan and a faker, so he's used to myths and legends about people. So this is about an art forger, and at the start Welles says, for the next hour or so, everything you see is going to be true and fact. But obviously after that hour, things kind of change. It's the most kind of experimental of Welles' work. He kind of saw this as a kind of a new kind of genre of filmmaking. So again, it's documentary shot. It's playful. It is quite funny, but on the whole, it's not the future of cinema. It's not a great film, but again, it has some Wellesian flair and spark, and he is having tremendous fun on it. So that's number 9, F for Fake. Probably Mr. Arkadin and F for Fake are for completionists only, I would say. If you've never seen an Orson Welles film, they're probably not the films to start with. Number 8 is Othello. This is a Criterion Blu-ray number 870, and this is one of the 3 Shakespeare films he did, with Chimes at Midnight and Macbeth. And again, this is a 2-disc version, because there's 2 different versions of the film. So this is a film that he started in 1950, well, probably late 40s. It took 3 years to finish, because he would run out of money, and then he would go and act in films, and then come back and shoot some more of it. So it's shot in Morocco and Italy. I think it is over a 3-year span. But for that, so that there is a sense that is a little bit disjointed, but for all that, it's still an absolutely beautiful film. Criterion have done a really good job of restoring it, because like I say, they've got a 1952 version which is 93 minutes and a 1955 version which is 91 minutes. Obviously Orson Welles plays Othello himself. The beginning, the start scene is, spoiler alert, of Othello and Desdemona's funeral, and it's just shot in almost Bergman like, you know, hooded black characters carrying the coffin over a sunrise in silhouette. I wouldn't be surprised if Bergman saw that and pinched it. It's such an amazing opening. Again, there's just wonderful set pieces. The murder in the sauna under the streets of, well, I'm not sure where it was actually shot, is just fantastic. Again, there's shots in it. The kind of one of the final shots of Othello when he finds out Iago has essentially just twisted his mind to kill Desdemona. There's a brilliant shot of Welles behind a gate, and it's just, again, there's shots in Welles films where you just say, everybody else just stop making films because these shots are just so beautiful. But for me, again, it's a little bit disjointed. Othello is not really my favourite Shakespeare or my favourite Shakespeare adaptation, but it's still worth having in both versions. Wells is fantastic as always, and there's just shots to die for, literally. So that is number 8. So number 7 is another Shakespeare adaptation, and this is Macbeth. Now this is a lovely Olive Film signature release, and again this has 2 different versions of the film. So this is the 1948 version, which is 107 minutes, which I'd never seen before until I got this edition, and the 1950 85-minute version, which again was cut by the studio, which is the version I had seen before. So the 1948 107-minute version, the characters do speak with a bit of a Scottish twang, but as far as Scottish twangs go, it's actually one of the best. Wells himself does the twang perfectly acceptably, and the 1950 cut version, they redubbed the actors with just speaking with an American accent. So I would highly recommend getting this edition if you're interested in Orson Welles or Shakespeare. This is a Region A, and he did this film in stark contrast to Othello, he did this one in about 26 days or something like that, something around there. It's all in studio pretty much. The castle is like hewn out of rock itself, so there's just lots of rocks and it's part of the castle with a gate. It's just so well done for so little money. And it's a really good version of Macbeth. Of course it's truncated because you can't do the whole thing, but it's brilliantly cinematic from the introduction of the 3 witches. Roddy McDowall even appears as Malcolm, the heir to the Duncan, the king. who runs away to England to get reinforcements to take on Macbeth. And it's really a great version of Macbeth. Orson Welles again is fantastic. Jeanette Nolan as Lady Macbeth's wonderful too. It rattles along. It's just really well made when you consider he did it for hardly any money and he did it in 20 odd days. And again, the shots in it that are just amazing. There's compositions in it that are just wonderful, totally Wellesian. And if you're not familiar with Shakespeare and you want an introduction to it, Macbeth by Orson Welles is a pretty good introduction. Obviously I'm biased. My favourite version of Macbeth's Throne of Blood by Kurosawa, which is more of an adaptation. But certainly purer versions of Macbeth, I would say Orson Welles' version is quite fantastic. So number 6 is a film I mentioned before, and it's The Magnificent Ambersons. This is a Criterion release, 952, and again 1942, second film, and sadly this is only 88 minutes because unlike other films like Mr. Arkadin, there is no lost footage. The footage is gone. This ranks as one of the great tragedies in cinema history. What if? Because Orson Welles is maybe the biggest kind of what if in cinema history. This is the story of Orson Welles isn't actually in it. He narrates, and this is the story of a well-to-do family, the turn of the century, early into the 20th century, and their downfall due to hubris and also kind of the industrial revolution happening, the invention of the automobile. It stars Agnes Moorehead as the aunt, who gives a fantastic performance, and Joseph Cotton as the inventor of the automobile, or part inventor of the automobile. Again, beautifully shot. Again, the shots and compositions in it that you just go, everybody else just stop. Joseph Cotton, who was kind of second fiddle to Welles in Citizen Kane, this is really his film. He just gives another wonderful Joseph Cotton performance. There's a great scene where the son of the family, who kind of is the one that kind of drives all the drama and the eventual tragedy, pardon the pun, drives, because he hates motor cars and thinks it's the worst idea in the world, and obviously Joseph Cotton's sitting there and he's the one that kind of invented them, and he just gives a brilliant speech about how George Amberson might actually be right, and it's just such a great performance with Joseph Cotton. So for example, there's a amazing kind of dinner party scene with the great camera moves, and of course that was cut by the studio. Like I say, a lot of it was cut by the studio. I think the original running time was maybe about 140 minutes, 135 minutes, something like that, and it got cut down to 88. And again, it's a tragedy, and obviously Pearl Harbor happened, so maybe, RKO kind of panicked and maybe didn't really want a film that was so tragic at the end and so downbeat. So it kind of, the arc kind of goes like that, and then they tacked on a happy ending at the end, which the actors weren't really happy about, and then obviously Orson Welles wasn't really happy about. So, I mean, people still say The Minister Ambersons is a masterpiece or whatever, but I can't really have it that high because it's not finished, essentially. It's not what Orson Welles actually wanted us to see. What is there is kind of a fragment of a masterpiece. Again, it's beautifully shot, beautifully acted. The story is a good one, but again, it's one of those what ifs. It's like Erich von Stroheim's Greed or Jodorowsky's Dune. It's right up there with cinematic what ifs. So that's The Magnificent Ambersons at number 6. At number 5 is one of Orson Welles' more straightforward films, and it's The Stranger. People might not have this as high, but as pure entertainment, this is a rollicking good film with Welles trademarks. It's the story of Edward G. Robinson, who is a Nazi hunter. Orson Welles originally wanted Agnes Moorehead, which would have been really interesting. But Edward G. Robinson plays the Nazi hunter who comes to this small town to try and find a Nazi who's escaped to rural America. And it happens to be Orson Welles, who's a school teacher and married to an all-American girl, and Edward G. Robinson and Orson Welles just have a very nice kind of cat and mouse game going on throughout the film. Again, it's not highbrow particularly, it's just good clean entertainment about Nazi hunting, and it's just a great wee film. Again, it's maybe not what Orson Welles kind of wanted to do, but again, I think it was a period where he had to kind of show the studios he could make a kind of a straight picture. He could just do a nice wee story and a nice wee film and get it out, and that was pretty much what The Stranger was. But because it's Welles, it's still a fantastic wee film. It's never going to be up the top of Welles lists, but it's well worth checking out. So number 4 is another difficult film, I suppose. It's The Trial. This is a Studio Canal Blu-ray based on the Franz Kafka novel and it stars Anthony Perkins a couple of years after Psycho as Joseph K., who is arrested for a crime that he has got no idea why he's arrested, and he tries to find out, but through bureaucracy and an oppressive regime, he never really finds out. The audience never really finds out. Again, this was kind of messed about with, and the audio at times is a little bit off, the lip syncing is a little bit off, but this is just a wonderful film. There's another version of The Trial with Anthony Hopkins and Kyle MacLachlan, which I think was made maybe about 1990. But this is just, it's a fantastic film. It starts with a nice, I can't remember what it's actually called, it's not pinboard animation, about pretty much the point of the film, as far as a man comes looking for answers but never actually gets them. You could argue what's the point of the film, but that is the point of the film. Bureaucracy will essentially win, and it's about the little man against oppressive regimes, and the little man never actually wins. Welles pops up himself as a bedridden judge. There's lots of quirky characters. There's lots of just, again, jaw-dropping shot compositions, and there's an absurdity to it. There's a kind of darkly comic vein running through it. Anthony Hopkins plays it perfectly as somebody who's confused, then angry, then resigned. Romy Schneider, Jean Moreau, I almost said Catherine Deneuve there, Jean Moreau, all give great support. It's a really nice addition by Studio Canal, and yeah, there's not much more to say about it apart from go watch it if you haven't. You might find it frustrating at times, but then that's kind of what Anthony Perkins' character's going through, so you essentially become frustrated with him, because as an audience we always want resolution and we always want answers, but in life you don't get resolution and you don't get answers. So I would certainly recommend the trial, even though you might need a little bit of patience with it. But I just love, it's set in Eastern Europe. It uses architecture really well, and it is kind of a view of a kind of broken down bureaucracy where nobody really knows what anybody else does or how the system works itself. It's still relevant and it's well worth watching. So number 3, again, might not be the most highbrow film that Orson Welles ever did. This is The Lady from Shanghai. This is the Indicator release, which is awesome. It's by number 7, an Indicator. Obviously Simon Callow, I should say, who wrote a book, which is a very good book in Orson Welles. He features on a lot of extras on all these editions, as does Peter Bogdanovich, who did a series of interviews which then became a book on Orson Welles, which again is very good. So The Lady from Shanghai, as the legend goes, Welles had to do a picture, and allegedly he was on the phone and he just happened to look at a book either a secretary was reading or was on a newsstand, depending which story you believe, and he said, oh yeah, it's called this, it's The Lady from Shanghai, never having read the book. So he cobbled together the script and went off and shot it, and he used Rita Hayworth, who was his estranged wife at the time, I think. And of course Rita Hayworth was famous for her red hair, so Orson Welles got her to chop it off and dye it blonde, as Welles would. And again, this is a twisty turny film noir about deceit and a murder plot, and Orson Welles puts on an Irish accent this time, which, to be fair, isn't as good as his Scottish accent in Macbeth. And again, this isn't the final version that Welles wanted, but what we have is a really enjoyable film noir, again with eccentric characters, fantastic set pieces. Obviously the Hall of Mirrors is famous at the end of the film, and a really dark vein throughout, a kind of nihilistic vein, which obviously you have to have if it's a film noir, and it's a great wee film. Again, it's maybe not the most highbrow, but it is just a lot of fun. Yeah, and that's all I can really say about Lady from Shanghai. It's well worth getting, and like I said, the Indicator release is certainly well worth getting. So we get to number 2. Don't worry, it's almost over, you'll be glad to know. And controversially, number 2 in my top 10 Orson Welles films is Citizen Kane, not number 1. This is the BFI release. People have in the past not criticised Citizen Kane, but kind of say it's more of a technical masterpiece. And obviously Wells said he didn't know anything, so that's why he just did stuff with Greg Toland, the DP, because he didn't know any better, so he just did stuff. Obviously you have the amazing tracking shot through the theatre, you have the shot going through the window with the rain. The opening is just jaw-droppingly good, but people kind of say, well, the story isn't actually that interesting, it is just a kind of technical masterpiece. But I kind of disagree with that. I think the story is compelling, but again, if you look at it through Wells's own life, it becomes more resonant as kind of somebody that had it all and then kind of loses it. It becomes more resonant with Wells afterwards. I mean, people obviously have said, well, Wells didn't write it, it was Herman Mankiewicz. I almost said a bad word there. But considering the performance he gives as a 25-year-old, you know, when he ages and then plays like a 70-odd or 80-year-old man, I mean, it's a fantastic performance by Wells. If you take away the writing, if you say, oh well, Greg Toland kind of came up with most of the shots, so even if you want to take that away, if you're a Wells hater, you can't take away his performance, because his performance is just fantastic. And again, there's not much more to say about Citizen Kane. If you've never seen it before, it will blow you away. Or, I don't know, maybe it won't if you're used to modern films, but still, it blows me away when I watch it. It's like 2001, where the scene where the guy's running around on the spaceship. It's like, I know how they did it, but every time I watch it, I'm still like, that's amazing. And you kind of get that with Citizen Kane. It's like, yes, it's now 70 odd years old, but it's still jaw-droppingly good. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, go out and buy it immediately and watch it on the biggest screen you can. It is literally a masterpiece, but it's not number 1. If you know anything about Orson Welles, you could probably guess what's number 1. But so number 1 is Touch of Evil. You could make the argument Orson Welles started film noir with Citizen Kane and ended film noir with Touch of Evil, because Touch of Evil is possibly the ultimate film noir. This is Eureka Masters of Cinema. It's number 25. And again, there are multiple cuts of this film. There's actually 3 cuts of this film in this edition. It's from 1958. There's a 96-minute cut. there's a 109-minute cut and a 111-minute cut. So there's a 1958 theatrical version in 2 ratios, the 1958 preview version, and the 1998 restructured version, which was restructured using Orson Welles' guidance notes, and that's probably the best version to see. Obviously, Touch of Evil is famous for the opening crane shot, which is spectacular. It's famous for Orson Welles being huge and almost unrecognisable as Quinlan, the corrupt detective. It's set in the border between Mexico and the US. Charlton Heston plays a Mexican. Not thoroughly convincing. And it's just dark. I mean, it's unbelievably dark. But it's just so fantastic. The ending's fantastic. Marlena Dietrich, who Wells didn't really tell anybody was going to be in it, kind of appears again. She's almost unrecognisable, and she makes really good chili. It's about it's about Orson Welles' corrupt cop, even though sometimes he might actually be right, and Charlton Heston as the DA and loggerheads over a case. But it's the kind of off-kilter, strange stuff that's going on that kind of makes it so fantastic. Well, put it this way, this is 1958, and Janet Leigh, who's Charlton Heston's wife, who's still waiting to go on her honeymoon, ends up in a rather seedy motel with a very odd Dennis Weaver playing the desk clerk, who acts really strangely, almost like somebody else in a motel with Janet Leigh. And Janet Leigh is kind of threatened by this biker gang, and it's really Mercedes McCambridge turns up as a leather clad it's very strange and very dark, and it's just fantastic. Obviously, I don't want to spoil the end, but the end, Marlena Dietrich's last lines are just absolute gold. For a film that's so wonderful, I'm not really describing it very well, but it's all about the atmosphere. Orson Welles just gives a fantastic performance. It's difficult to actually describe what makes Touch of Evil so fantastic. It's the vibe, it's the atmosphere, it's the kind of uneasiness of it all, and then obviously the technical wizardry of Welles, shot composition of Welles, and his ability to kind of talk about dark things but still like managing to work within the studio system. Obviously not that well, because they cut Touch of Evil as well, but 1958, you could make the argument this is the ultimate film noir. You could make the argument this pretty much killed off film noirs. I know they kind of came back in the 70s as neo-noirs like Chinatown and whatever, but this is kind of the benchmark, I think, of dark noirs, and it kind of led into the 60s, where obviously more kind of explicit stuff was beginning to be shown in films in the 60s, and this is right in the cusp of it. This is kind of the precursor to it, if you like. So that's, I think, it. Finally talking about Orson Welles, which does take a time because, like I say, his myth and his legends, whether they're true or not, um, are worth talking about as much as his films. And again, he is the great what if director. What if he was actually allowed to make what he wanted to make? Yeah, thanks very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments below if you're still awake, and what your top 10 Orson Welles films would be. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for watching. This is Solitude Ronin Film saying farewell.